New Mexico Territory, 1883. By late afternoon, Pine Ridge had gone so quiet, Tess Reed could hear the leather creak around Cal Rusk's hand. He had her by the arm in the middle of the street. Her father, Will Reed, held her other wrist and stared at the dust between his boots. Hank Cole stood a few paces away, broad-shouldered and still, blocking the clearest path toward the livery. Sheriff Tom Moss watched from the boardwalk. His badge caught the sun. Nothing else about him moved. Tess's sleeve had torn at the seam. A strip of pale cloth fluttered against her skin, while the wind pushed grit along the street in thin, dry ribbons. No one in Pine Ridge stepped forward. Everyone knew what the Rusk name meant. A debt that had swollen to $1,100. A ranch already weakened by dry seasons. A spring-fed Creek Vern Rusk wanted badly enough to bind his son to Tess and call the bargain mercy. Tess did not cry. She looked at Cal until he had to look away first. Then hoofbeats sounded beyond the feed shed. Slow ones. A Rowan horse came into view carrying a lean man in a weather-worn coat. Gabe Stone was 41, a former territorial scout who had planned to pass through Pine Ridge before sundown. He let the horse stop on its own. His eyes moved from Tess's torn sleeve to Will's white-knuckled grip, then to Tom Moss and the useless badge on his chest. "Let her go." I did not raise his voice. Cal's fingers tightened, maybe from pride, maybe because Hank Cole was watching. Gabe swung down from the saddle and left both hands where every man on that street could see them. No threat, no hurry. That was what made the silence worse. "This is family business," Cal said. Gabe looked at Tess. She answered for herself. "Let go of me, Cal." For one long second, nobody breathed. Then Cal released her. Will's hand followed a heartbeat later. Gabe touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat. "Touch her again," he said. The words were quiet enough to make half the street lean closer. Then he turned towards the livery, as if the matter were finished. It wasn't. At the far end of town, Hank Cole climbed into his saddle. I did not ride toward the Reed Ranch. I turned north, toward Vern Rusk. By the time Hank Cole disappeared beyond the North Ridge, the light over Pine Ridge had turned copper. Gabe Stone stood beside the livery trough, while his roan drank in slow pulls, her bit clicking softly against the wood. Behind him, the town had begun talking again, but nobody came close enough to repeat what had happened in the street. Will Reed approached with his hat in both hands, and the look of a man who had spent too many nights trying to make one bad choice looked like the only choice left. "You should have kept riding," Will said. Gabe glanced toward the road Hank had taken. "Maybe." Will's jaw tightened. "Vern Rusk holds the note on my ranch. 2 dry seasons cut my herd near in half. I borrowed to keep feed in the barn and cattle on their feet. Now he says I owe $1,100. Gabe looked at him. "And Tess?" Will lowered his eyes. "He says she marries Cal. The debt disappears." A boot scraped behind them. Tess stood near the hitch rail, her torn sleeve pinned closed. Dust still marked the place where Cal had gripped her. "Say the rest," she told her father. Will went still. Tess looked at Gabe. "The Reed place sits over the easiest approach to a spring-fed creek south of the mesa. By August, when the shallow draws go dry, that water keeps our cattle alive, and Rusk wants it. I wants everything that drinks from it." Will rubbed one palm over the other. "If he forecloses, he gets the ranch. If I give him Tess, I keep the house." Tess's eyes hardened. "You don't give him me." The words were quiet, but Will flinched. Gabe did not step between them. That mattered. For the first time that afternoon, Tess had spoken, and a man had not tried to finish the decision for her. "You made Vern angry today," she said. "I noticed. He won't come himself first." Gabe's gaze shifted north. "No. He'll send Hank. Probably." Will looked at him. "Then leave before dark, Mr. Stone. Whatever brought you through Pine Ridge isn't worth this." Gabe ran a hand down the Rowan's neck. He had meant to be miles south by sunset. Instead, he looked toward the Reed Ranch, where a thin line of cottonwoods marked the water Vern Rusk wanted badly enough to buy a woman with her father's debt. "I'll ride out in the morning," Gabe said. But that night, He slept beside the livery door with his rifle within reach, and sometime after midnight, the coyotes stopped calling. The coyotes did not start again. Gabe was awake before the first horse reached the edge of the Reed pasture. He had left the livery after midnight and taken a position above the Reed porch, where he could see the corral and low ground beyond it. The rifle rested across his forearms. I had learned long ago that men coming to talk used roads. These men did not. 4 riders moved through the dark grass from the north, spreading apart as they approached the fence. Hank Cole rode in front. The first shot struck a corral post and tore a fistful of wood into the yard. A gelding screamed. The second round hit the rail beside the water barrel. Will Reed came through the front door with an old rifle in his hands. "Stay inside," Gabe said from above. Will froze. Then Tess appeared behind him. Another shot cracked through the yard. The cattle pushed hard against the far gate. Tess saw the latch jumping loose and ran for it before either man could stop her. She reached the gate as 3 steers slammed against the boards. Her boots slid in the dust. She threw her weight against the timber and caught the latch with both hands. Gabe fired once. The bullet punched through the side of the water barrel beside Hank, throwing a sheet of cold water across his horse's neck. The animal shied sideways. Gabe worked the lever. His second shot struck the dirt beneath another rider's mount. The horse reared and nearly threw its man. "Next one lands higher," Gabe called. No shouting followed. No brave answer. Only rein snapping tight and horses turning north. Hank stayed a second longer than the others. Even in the dark, Gabe could feel the man looking for him. Then Hank wheeled away. Silence returned in pieces. Tess still had both hands around the gate latch. Her palms were bleeding where the rough wood had split the skin. Will lowered his rifle. Gabe climbed down from the roof. "You knew they were coming," Tess said. "I knew somebody would." She looked toward the dark pasture where the riders had vanished. "They'll come back." "Yes." "With more men?" Gabe crouched beside the shattered barrel and touched the fresh bullet groove in the wood. "Maybe." He looked toward the north. "But Vern just told us something he didn't mean to." Tess waited. "If he trusted the paper in his hand," Gabe said, "he wouldn't need men shooting in the dark." And for the first time, Tess looked less afraid of Vern Rusk than curious about what he might be hiding. By sunrise, the broken barrel at the Reed place had stopped leaking. The mud beneath it had already begun to dry. Tess wrapped her palms in clean cloth and helped Will move the cattle away from the damaged fence, while Gabe replaced the shattered latch with a length of wire. None of them spoke much. The work said enough. 2 miles north, Vern Rusk was less quiet. Hank Cole stood in the ranch office with dust still on his coat and one wet sleeve from Gabe's warning shot. "You had 4 men," Vern said. "We weren't sent to kill him. You were sent to remind Will Reed what happens when he forgets who holds his note." Cal Rusk stood near the window. "I had heard enough." "You sent men to shoot at Tess's home?" Vern did not look at him. "I sent men to protect what belongs to this family." "She doesn't belong to this family." "Not yet." Cal's jaw tightened. "That's not what I meant." Vern closed the ledger on his desk. For the first time, he looked directly at his son. "The Reed place controls the cleanest approach to that spring-fed creek. By August, the shallow draws south of Pine Ridge will be dust. My herd cannot drink promises. So this is about water. This is about keeping this ranch alive 10 years from now. And marrying Tess gets you the Reed land without a foreclosure fight." Vern's expression hardened. "It settles a debt." Cal looked at the closed ledger. "What debt?" The room went still. Vern did not answer quickly enough. Back at the Reed ranch, Gabe noticed something else. Hank's men had fired into wood, water, and darkness. They had not tried to burn the barn, steal cattle, or kill Will. It had been intimidation, nothing more. That bothered him. Men who held clean legal ground usually preferred a courthouse to a midnight ride. Tess found him near the creek, checking the hoofprints left along the pasture edge. "You think he's afraid of something," she said. "I think Vern wants your father scared before anybody starts asking questions." Tess looked toward the house. Will had kept every bank letter, every note, every receipt from the last 3 years in a tin box beneath the kitchen shelf. That evening, after his father had gone to bed, Tess set the lamp low and opened it. The first paper she found carried Vern Rusk's seal. The number written across it was $400. The paper Cal had quoted in the street said $1,100. Tess held them side by side. Then she noticed the ink was not the same shade. Tess did not sleep. She kept the two papers side by side beneath the lamp until the oil burned low enough to smoke the chimney. $400 on the older record, $1,100 on the newer one. The extra figures sat darker on the page, pressed harder into the paper than the rest of the writing. At dawn, Will found her still at the table. "You knew about this?" He stared at the documents until his face changed. "I knew what I borrowed," he said. "I stopped knowing what I owed." That answer frightened Tess more than a lie would have. By late afternoon, she carried both papers to the corral. Gabe was brushing dust from the roan's shoulder. Slow strokes from neck to flank. Tess held out a tin cup of coffee first. I took it. Then she handed him the papers. Gabe read them without speaking. "Can you prove who changed it?" he asked. "Not yet." "Good." Her eyes narrowed. "You call that good?" "I call it better than accusing a man before you can make him answer for it." Tess looked at the darker ink again. For the first time since Main Street, anger stopped being the only thing keeping her upright. Now she had a question Vern Rusk might not want asked aloud. Gabe returned the papers. "You've seen this before," she said. His hand stayed on the roan's neck. "A man back east held paper on my family once." Tess waited. "My younger sister was still there when I rode out on a tracking job. I thought I had time." He looked toward the dry hills instead of at Tess. "I came back 4 days too late." Nothing more. Tess did not ask what happened. She only folded the papers and slipped them inside her dress pocket. 4 days is a long time," she said. "It gets longer." A rider appeared on the road before sunset. I did not dismount. He handed Will a folded message and left. Vern Rusk expected the wedding to proceed Sunday morning at the Rusk barn. Neighbors had already been invited. The minister had been told. Cal would be waiting. Tess read the note twice, then once more. Gabe watched her face. "You don't have to go." She folded the message carefully. "That's exactly why I do." And somewhere inside the house, Will Reed sat down hard, as if Sunday had already arrived. Saturday night settled over the Reed ranch without wind. That made every small sound seem deliberate. Leather pulled through a buckle. A rifle cloth dragged once along steel. Paper folded against paper. Tess sat at the kitchen table with the 2 debt records in front of her, while Will moved slowly between the stove and the window. Gabe checked his saddle outside. By midnight, nobody had said what all 3 of them understood. Sunday would end something. Maybe the wedding. Maybe the ranch. Maybe the little piece Pine Ridge had left. Gabe came inside and set his hat on the table. "You stay here tomorrow." Tess looked up. "No. Hank will be there. So will half the county." "That won't stop a bullet." "No. But hiding here won't stop Vern either." Gabe's jaw tightened. "This isn't about proving you're brave." Tess stood. "I'm not trying to prove anything." She placed one hand over the older note. "If I stay here, while men decide whether I belong to Cal Rusk, then Vern still gets what he wanted." Gabe said nothing. "I have to be the one who says no where everybody can hear it." The room went quiet. Will looked away first. Gabe had spent years trusting distance. Ride before dawn. Take the next job. Leave before another family's trouble found a place to settle on him. It had kept him alive. It had never made 4 days any shorter. "There's still time for me to ride out," he said. Tess met his eyes. "I know." That was all. No plea. No promise. Nothing that gave him permission to pretend the choice belonged to anyone else. Gabe picked up his hat. "I'll check the horses." Before dawn, Tess woke to the sound of tack in the yard. For one cold second, she thought he had chosen the road. She stepped outside barefoot. Dress pulled close against the morning chill. The roan stood saddled near the fence. So did Will's mare. Gabe was tightening the cinch on a 3rd horse. Tess stopped. I glanced at her. "We leave early." Will came through the doorway behind her, carrying the debt papers. In oilcloth. His hands shook, but he did not hide them. Gabe mounted first. Tess climbed into her saddle without help. No one spoke as the 3 horses turned toward Pine Ridge. Ahead of them, beyond the low Pinyon Hills, the Rusk barn waited dressed for a wedding. By the time Tess rode through its doors, There would be no quiet life left to return to. By 9 o'clock, the rusk barn was full. White cloth had been tied between the posts. Cottonwood branches bent into an arch near the far wall, and lanterns hung from the rafters, even though the morning sun was already bright enough to turn the dust gold. Neighbors filled the benches and stood along the walls. Some had come for a wedding. Others had come because Pine Ridge had been talking for 6 days. Vern Rusk stood beneath the arch in a dark coat, one hand resting on the head of his cane, as if the people and the morning itself belonged to him. Cal stood several feet away. He did not look at Tess when she entered. Will walked beside her with the oilcloth packet under one arm. Gabe came last. He did not step in front of Tess. He stayed half a pace behind and to her left, close enough to act, far enough to let everyone see who had chosen to walk through those doors. Sheriff Tom Moss stood near the wall. His eyes moved once toward Gabe, then back to Vern. Vern smiled. "Tess, I'm glad you came to your senses." "No," she said. The single word traveled farther through the barn than a shout would have. Will stepped forward before Vern could answer. His hands trembled as he opened the oilcloth. "My original note," he said. $400. A murmur moved through the crowd. Will placed the newer paper beside it. "And this is the debt your people brought to my house. $1,100. Vern's expression did not change. "Interest accumulates. $700 doesn't appear because a man says the word interest." Will's voice nearly broke, then steadied. "Bring your ledger." The barn went still. "Let Sheriff Moss read it." Tom Moss lifted his head. Vern did not move. Tess watched the silence spread from one face to the next. For years, people in Pine Ridge had lowered their eyes whenever Vern spoke about notes, boundaries, cattle, jazz, or water. Now they were looking at him. Tess took the darker paper from her father. "I will not marry Cal Rusk to settle a debt you won't even open your own book to prove." Cal finally looked at her, then at his father. Vern's jaw hardened. Near the side wall, Hank Cole's hand drifted slowly toward his revolver. Gabe saw it. So did Cal. Hank's fingers had barely touched the grip before Gabe moved. He crossed the space between them in 2 steps. His left hand caught Hank's wrist. His right drove the man's forearm hard against the post. The revolver struck the floorboards and spun beneath a bench. No shot, no blood, just the sound of metal turning in the dust. Gabe released him. "Leave it there." Hank's face had gone red. For 1 second, it looked as if pride might cost him more than sense could save. Then Cal spoke. "Enough." The word surprised everyone, maybe Cal most of all. He walked past Hank and stopped in front of Vern. "Is the 700 real?" Vern stared at him. "This is not the place." It became the place when you invited half the county. A few people shifted along the wall. Vern lowered his voice. "I built everything you see because somebody had to think past one dry season." Cal glanced toward Tess, then toward Will. "You told me this marriage was mercy." "It was. Now you call it business." "It is business." Cal's mouth tightened. "Then which part was the lie?" Vern's cane struck the floor once. "You think cattle live on good intentions? That creek keeps the South Range watered when everything else dries. The Reed place gives us access. Without it, we lose cattle every August." There it was. Not love, not mercy. Water, land, numbers. Cal looked at Tess again. This time he did not look away. "I won't marry her." Vern went very still. Cal continued. "Not for that ranch, not for the creek, not for a debt you won't prove." The barn seemed to contract around them. For the first time in years, Vern Rusk had given an order and watched it fail before witnesses. Hank bent suddenly toward the bench where his revolver had rolled. Gabe moved again. Someone behind them stumbled backward. A shoulder struck the post. The nearest lantern swung hard on its hook. Tess saw the chain slip. "Gabe." The lantern fell. Glass shattered across the floor. Oil spread beneath the white cloth tied around the post. A flame ran through it in a thin orange. Then climbed up. For half a second, nobody moved. The fire reached the hanging cloth above their heads, and the wedding barn became a trap. The fire moved faster than fear. Flame climbed the white cloth, caught the dry cottonwood branches above the wedding arch, and ran toward the rafters before half the people inside understood what they were looking at. Then the barn broke apart into shouting. Someone knocked over a bench. Another man pushed toward the main doors. Smoke rolled low beneath the roof. "Move!" Gabe shouted. This time Tom Moss moved too. The sheriff pulled people away from the center aisle, while Gabe forced open the nearest door and shoved the first line of neighbors into daylight. Tess stayed beside Will. "Go," Gabe told her. "My father. I've got him." She looked at Will. I was already turning back toward her. That was when Hank reached beneath the bench for his revolver. Maybe he meant to defend himself. Maybe he meant to recover the last thing that still made him feel powerful. It did not matter. The shot went wild. Will jerked once and fell against the hitching post inside the barn. "Pah!" Tess dropped beside him. Blood darkened his shirt high near the shoulder. Gabe reached them through the smoke and hauled Will upright. "Keep pressure there." Tess pressed both hands against the wound. Will groaned, but stayed conscious. Together they staggered through the doors as a burning length of cloth fell behind them. Outside, Tess lowered her father into the dirt. Men stood staring at the barn. For one terrible second, Pine Ridge looked exactly as it had on Main Street. Watching, waiting, doing nothing. Tess tore off the cleanest piece of her undersleeve and packed it against Will's wound. Then she looked toward the stock trough. "Buckets!" Nobody moved. Her voice sharpened. "Form a line." Tom Moss grabbed the first bucket. Cal grabbed the second. Then another neighbor stepped forward. Then another. Within moments, the same people who had watched Tess dragged through town were passing water hand to hand, beneath a sky turning black with smoke. Gabe went back once for an older man trapped near the rear wall. When he came out again, coughing and half blind, the roof groaned behind him. The center rafters collapsed. The barn was lost. Will was alive. And across the yard, Vern Rusk stood alone. I did not watch the flames. He watched the bucket line. The people of Pine Ridge were finally looking at one another instead of at him. The bullet had passed high through the shoulder, missing the bone badly enough to spare his arm, though the doctor warned him it would never move the same way again. For the first week, Tess slept in a chair beside his bed. Gabe repaired fences. Neither spoke much about the barn. They did not need to. Pine Ridge had already begun doing that for them. Men who had stood silent on Main Street now repeated the figures from Will's papers. $400, $1,100, $700 no ledger had yet explained. Tom Moss collected statements from those who had heard Vern refuse to produce his records. The wedding never took place, and without Tess's consent, there was nothing left to pretend was a marriage. The Reed debt did not vanish like smoke. The original money was still owed. Tess understood that better than anyone. But the added $700 could no longer be used quietly to frighten Will into surrendering his ranch or his daughter. That changed everything. Not enough to make the Reed place rich. Not enough to bring rain. Not enough to fill the creek beyond what the spring could give. But enough to leave the future undecided. And for Tess, undecided was finally another word for hers. She took over the ranch books while Will recovered. Every receipt, every feed purchase, every dollar borrowed or paid. Her handwriting filled the new ledger in narrow, steady lines. Vern kept his cattle. I kept his house. I kept the northern range. But Pine Ridge no longer lowered its eyes when his name appeared on a note. Cal left his father's ranch before the month was out. No one asked him to stay. Gabe remained until Will could walk to the porch without help. Then on Tuesday before sunrise, Tess heard the familiar pull of a saddle strap. The roan waited by the fence. Gabe stood beside her. "You found another trail?" Tess asked. "One I should have finished weeks ago." She nodded. Neither of them spoke about staying. That was the one thing Gabe had learned not to choose for her. Tess rested her hand on the fence rail. "Touch her again." Something almost like a smile touched his face. Wasn't a threat. He swung into the saddle. Was a fact. Gabe rode toward the low hills as sunrise spread across the dry country. Tess watched until the dust settled. Then she went back inside. The new ledger lay open on the table. August lifted one page. Tess placed her palm over it and held it still. "Thank you for staying with Tess and Gabe to the end of this journey through Pine Ridge," Some victories do not bring back what was lost, but they can return something just as precious: the right to choose your own future. If this story of courage, sacrifice, justice, and a hard-earned second chance stayed with you, subscribe for more Western romance and frontier survival stories. And tell us in the comments, would you have stayed and fought for the Reed Ranch or ridden away before Sunday came? Disclaimer: this is a fictional Western romance story inspired by life on the 19th century American frontier. Characters, events, dialogue, and dramatic situations are created for storytelling purposes. Historical settings and cultural details are researched for authenticity.